I don't watch TV. Actually, I do have it on in the mornings for about an hour as a bit of background noise and a countdown to leaving time when I've got to go to work, with a weather report thrown in for good measure. I haven't watched evening TV or waited for a show to come on for well over 6 months, and tend to get recommendations for shows from the internet. The downside of this is that shows get cancelled just as they hit their stride because people don't watch them when they're on their preliminary screening. Shows like Netflix realise this, of course, and throw out a whole season so you can binge watch it and follow the story arcs better. YouTube is great too. Fight past the clickbait and you can find wonderful people teaching you wonderful things. Real people you'd never meet in real life, from across the world in a swamp showing you what living there is like, and then stick around for a tutorial on how to bleed your brakes. Getting back to normal TV though, and I can't help but find myself shouting at the machine for its so-called entertainment or news, where the content ranges from who cares to how can you possibly call that news in the first place? For the interest of science, I decided to hunt the web for the content shown today on the morning shows to not only see if I was justified in my old codger ramblings, or if it actually holds any conceivable benefit to humanity today. I suspect though that it's just filler between the adverts, and that's the real content these days. So here are a few examples chosen at random and edited to get the gist concisely and to avoid getting pinged by the content Nazis. Let's start with a show here in Australia called Today, and I notice they just come out and call it an agenda.
So, what should we reveal and what should we leave out? That is the topic of today's agenda.
Well, it came about when my daughter stumbled on a photo. And it's not the kind of photo you ever want your children to see. So this particular photo was when I was 19. I was drunk. I was draped all over this guy who wasn't daddy. And suddenly my daughter went, oh my God,
who's my daddy?
Who are you? I'm drunk in all of these photos. But that's your early 20s, right? And suddenly my daughter's got these questions of like, but hang on, you're not just mum, you're this person. Who are you?
Yeah.
I was having fun.
Yeah.
And I said, well, you know, before I met Daddy, I had this whole other life. And before I started doing this, you know, I used to write for men's magazines. And I thought, well, how much do I reveal? So slowly but surely I've started saying, well, you know, I'm not just a mum, I am a human and a flawed human. And slowly as she gets older, I guess I'm going to have to just give her little bits of information.
Because, Georgie, no one is perfect, and I think the kids really need to know that. But I did have incidences of, like, vomiting in a taxi and having to wake up my mother's boyfriend and get $20 to clean up the mess, all that kind of thing. I'm able to talk to my boys now about that kind of situation. It's like we're talking adult to adult.
Elvin, is there anything we shouldn't reveal?
Oh, so many things.
Really?
Look, yeah, I think you can reveal little bits, but if you lost, like...
So if your child comes to you and says, Mum, did you do drugs?
You do wait, it's age appropriate.
So anyway, from what I understand, it's about what and when to tell your kids about your past. Apart from ignoring the fact that kids were obviously rooting around in their parents' private photo stashes and what to do about that, apparently you can describe your youth and idiocy to your kids to show you understand theirs. But don't tell them too soon. Make sure they're of an age to understand. Then it will be like talking adult to adult. Really, this is educational. I can't work this out for myself. I need to buy the latest book to get these stunning insights, apparently. I wonder what else is on the agenda today. I should introduce this next clip by saying how obvious it is that when the person interviewed goes off the idea being pushed by the narrative, the interviewer starts to give impatient yeah, or something similar, and then diverts back to the other speaker. I cut most of that sort of stuff out here, but you may catch it towards one of them.
Do you ban your underage children from alcohol altogether, or slowly introduce them to booze in the hope of removing any mystery around it? And teens who drink weekly are up to 3 times more likely to become binge drinkers later in life.
The safest option for children is not to drink. Earlier onset drinking carries risks with it. You may be more likely to be involved in drink driving, more likely to be a heavy drinker, indeed more likely later in life to become dependent on alcohol. That's why the safest option in the National Health and Medical Research Council guidelines is to not drink when you're young. But we also know that young people, their developing brains are much more sensitive to the effects of alcohol, and it might be a subtle difference, a difference between getting a B plus and a C plus at school.
The oldest boy, he's 16, he's a musician. He's been exposed to it, he knows what it's about, and that, you know, getting drunk is actually not the thing to do.
If he asked you to buy him alcohol for a party, would you give it to him?
No, I would not buy him alcohol. No, what I'm talking about is actually introducing them to a different sort of style and culture of drinking, which is actually not about getting drunk, but it's about alcohol as part of food and conversation and fun and friends and family.
I said to my children, look, I'd prefer you delay drinking because the evidence has changed my mind about this, but if you do drink, then I'd rather you drank in my presence.
New research in the last 24 hours has sparked a lot of questions or a lot of debate over whether or not the drinking age in Australia should be lifted to 21 as it is in the United States. James, what do you think about that?
The raising of the drinking age to 21 was actually, I think, a pretty disastrous thing for alcohol culture for a number of reasons. Number one, it really encouraged that terrible binge drinking, and I'm talking about real getting absolutely off your face, knee-walking drunk, because there was simply no way to do it in public places where there was more moderation. It is very expensive now to get a slab of beer. Then you push kids more towards pot, drugs, and things like that, which I think are more dangerous.
This is how you behave yourself, so what you do with alcohol is an important influence. But talk to your children, talk to them how they can look after their mates. By learning how they look after their mates, they can look after themselves. Teach young people how to treat alcohol with more respect. A drug many of us enjoy, but a drug that has some risks.
So that was another story that's been on the merry-go-round for a while. You've seen this one do the rounds a few times, I bet. It's one of those stories pushed out to put that little seed in your brain to start the programming of alcohol abuse. The need to raise prices perhaps in a future story. The raising of the drinking age is pushed here, and although pushed as new research, it's all been packaged up the same way before. Who's wasting more money on research already done several times? You might have noticed the name of the governing body or the research body shoehorned in there because science. Again though, you'll notice that these seed stories, as I call them, are there to sit in your brain and give life to a talking point for others, or a priming for something coming down the pike. They always seem to end with talking to your kids, or another group, and explaining what they should deem as the done thing to bring them in line. So, what's next?
The number of overweight children in our country has doubled in recent years, and 1 in 4 Australian children are now overweight or obese. Is it up to mums and dads to tell their children they're overweight?
Well, look, the bottom line is that we live in what experts call an obesogenic environment now. So it means that for most people, including kids and adults, it's become increasingly difficult to control your weight over time. So when I see families and the norm is to have a pantry full of chippies and packaged snacks and highly processed foods, being on games, electronic games, all this stuff has become normal. The result is weight gain.
So, Justin, what Joan is saying, it's the perfect storm, isn't it?
Parents are actually contributing to it as well, because when you walk into the average family room, the parents are also on their screens, and parents are not as active either. This is across the board. There's a line of thought that is, you know, you've got to tell your kids you're overweight, you need to do something about this. This is one of the worst things that we can do, is actually say to our kids, you know, you might be a bit chubby. The data says that kids who are told that 10, 15 years later are much more likely to actually be overweight or obese. Girls in particular, when they think about their bodies, they think about what their bodies look like. The science shows us that boys, however, when they think and talk about their bodies, they talk about what their bodies can do.
But I'd suggest giving the family an overhaul and start teaching them about nutrition right from when they're very young, so that they start to understand. And of course it should be age appropriate. Start teaching them about how this is important for their brain function at school.
Better to come sensitively from parents than to be bullied in the schoolyard.
Well, the data again tells us that children from about the age of 5 or 6, again particularly girls, become highly aware of how they look. And while kids are not as sensitive as we might like them to be, parents can also be more sensitive. Again, telling your kids that you're overweight predicts longer-term weight problems.
I know in one of my kids' school, the teachers were giving out lollies as a treat if they got the answer right. I mean, it's everywhere. Yeah. Parties.
As a parent, never talk about your own body in a negative way in terms of your weight. The other thing I really feel strongly about is we've got to work together as a community to change this right from the top to the bottom. From a government level, we have to have urban planning. Schools have to be involved.
Employers have got to let parents actually have a life outside of work.
Well, that was a corker of a story, wasn't it? First of all, what the fuck is an obesogenic environment? Fuck's sake. Then we get the data says, the science shows us. And like the other stories, the discussion should be had with your children, and you should recognise you are part of the problem and are flawed, and always be age appropriate. Are you starting to see the patterns yet? Science has found that this basic duh you knew is already, surprise surprise, a fact. So because you were too stupid to work it out for yourself because of fluoride poisoning, now go and tell your children so they can be indoctrinated to being a good member of society. And here are some hints on how to tell them. And don't forget, here's what you've learned today. All this will be better for them at school, if they aren't already low enough from seeing pictures of mummy draped around another daddy completely pissed. Or completely pissed themselves from the bad parenting you've done, which in turn has dropped their grade from a B- to a C- apparently, due to science. But not to worry, because little Johnny or Josie had that age-appropriate talking to from you. They were able to correctly answer the question as to why they couldn't shoehorn themselves through the door into nutrition class and earn themselves a sugary sweet for their trouble. Learning. So time for one more, you reckon? Let's pop across to Sunrise, another Australian staple.
The royal duo opened up about how that mockery over their fashion sense and lifestyle has reduced them to tears at points.
Fuck no.
Under the revised codes, ads showing only women doing housework and others showing men struggling with parenting or drinking beer will be banned. This Dettol ad would likely breach the new code.
Wiping germy surfaces with a sponge can be just as bad as doing this.
Another code, you know, what is it? The code of advertising, the code of ethics. I mean, first of all, I don't know about any of you, but that kitchen bench, just the whole house was too white and bright. It should be banned on that basis alone. If it's perfect to me, Brett might not like it, Kylie might be disgusted by it, you might disagree with it. It's like, come on guys, can we just put our time, our energy, our resource and money into better things other than this?
Celebrate our differences.
Yes.
We love a regulation in this country, don't we?
We've only got two sexes to choose from.
Yes.
Basically, we've got men and we've got women. If you're going to put somebody in an ad, there's kind of only two choices. What?
Yeah. Well, we've got
them and they.
LBT.
Sure. Okay. Right. That is a percentage as well. We'll put that into the mix as well. But they're the choices. So good luck if you're an advertiser and you're trying to advertise your product.
Oh, they were doing so well there for a minute. Don't forget all the minority groups there, even though none are represented by any of the presenters we've seen here today, as far as I know. So watch that space for that coming shitstorm and the demands to take over the stations from those pesky LGBT groups. For my part, the only consolation I got out of spending a day editing this shit and watching this drivel is not having to watch another one. But I hope you enjoyed mine nonetheless.